disconnect the battery, push down here, slide that cover off, use a 10mm socket, loosen up on the negative terminal, take it off, and set it aside. Loosen up the clamp right here. On this vehicle, it has a worm clamp, so I'm just using a straight blade screwdriver. If you have a spring clamp, you may have to use some pliers. And just move it out of the way. Just slide it off. Use a T20 socket and take the screws out of the intake right here. Should be one there. There should be another one there. This vehicle doesn't have that. And slide that off. Then grab underneath the cover, slide up. Sometimes that's fairly difficult. You might have to pry it up. It just has these boots holding it on. There's one missing there. I'm going to remove this hose from the throttle body. Just use some hose clamp pliers. Move that clamp, grab the hose, and just slide it out of the way. You can disconnect it down here if you would like. Just push down on the tabs, slide that out, and then there's another hose underneath here. It's a little bit tricky to get in there. Just gotta squeeze right there. Slide that off. You can use some type of pliers. There we go. And slide that off out of your way. Disconnect the connector for the throttle body. Push down on that tab. You can use a screwdriver or a pick. And slide the connector off, just like that, out of the way. And take these 4 bolts out of the throttle body. Use a T20 socket. Just be careful not to drop them. And grab the throttle body and just slide it out. And we'll take this hose that's connected. Instead of separating that, we'll just slide it off over here and over here. Pull the valve up, purge valve, and then disconnect the connector on the purge valve. There's a little tab right there. You can push down the tab with a screwdriver and slide it off. Slide that off. And you can just reroute this and just leave this over here for now. Now we can disconnect all the connectors right here. This is for the fuel injectors. Just push down on the tab and slide it up. Just like that. And this cam sensor as well. Very carefully, just use the screwdriver, lift the tab. Slide it up. Do the same on these other ones. Now underneath here, take the harness up. You can just pry underneath here. It's just pushed in. And then lay the harness to the side, just like that. Now we're going to take these 2 bolts out that are holding this bracket on. You're going to need a triple square socket, a number 9 or 9mm. Take those out. Try not to drop them. And just grab that plate and just slide it out. It's going to slide out here and twist it out of the way. before you take the fuel injectors out, and make sure you have a hole or a rag over the hole right there. And just take a blowgun and just blow off some of the dust and dirt that's in there. So I need to take the screws out for the fuel rail. Use a T20 socket, and there's 2 screws, one right here, one right there. And don't drop the screw. Might want to use a magnet. And very gently grab the fuel rail and just wiggle it back and forth a little bit. Just pulling out in this direction. Now we're not going to release the fuel pressure because we're not pulling the injectors out. Go nice and slow. There we go. Those came right out, nice and easy. I'm just gonna set this aside, just keep it out of your way. If you want, you can pop this off here, set it over here so it's a little bit more out of your way. From underneath the car, we need to remove this panel. Use a T20 socket and remove these bolts or screws. And just slide this down. The easiest way to get to these 2 bolts is from underneath the vehicle. You're going to use a triple square socket, a 8mm, and a long extension. Just try to get these 2 bolts. You can try to get them from up top, but it's really not that easy. Get a tap on there, hold on. Got one. One's right there. That one was easier. Now the dipstick has to be removed, so just take a screwdriver and just push down on this little retainer. It just slides down. Move this wiring harness out of the way. There's some retainers right there and right here. Just slide that out. Disconnect this connector right here. Just push down on the tab, slide it down, and disconnect this hose right here. Push down on the tabs and slide it out. Now we're going to take all these intake bolts out. Use a 6mm Allen socket. You really want to use a thinner one. Take those out. And then there's a couple holes where you have to access the 2 bolts through there as well. And you can just, for the most part, leave them in the intake. If you have to, use a magnet, try to get them out. But there is this little sleeve on there that might hold them in. Just be careful not to drop them into the intake, or into the holes of the engine. All right, so that's the last one. If you can try to get the dipstick tube, this plastic piece, to slide off where the dipstick tube goes down, that would be ideal. Or just take a pry bar and just pry behind here, just very carefully, trying not to break that piece. If it breaks, I'm sure it's replaceable. Get that like that. And just slide the intake up and out. And before you take it out completely, just take this hose off. Just use some hose clamp pliers. Slide that down. And just try to pop that hose off. Just slide it off. And grab the intake and slide it out. If you have any of the gaskets that got stuck there, take those off. Try to be careful not to get any sand or any dirt and debris inside the intake ports. You can put some rags in there if you'd like, and just clean this all up. Take some brake parts cleaner, even a razor blade if you want, or a scraper, and just scrape some of this off. You want to transfer this over to the new one. Use a T20 socket. Take this screw out and just grab the sensor very gently. Rock it back and forth. Check the seal. You should put a new O-ring on there if it doesn't look too good. This one looks okay. Let's slide it in there. And tighten down the screw. Just grab the clip that goes on here from the old one and install that. And because it's extremely hard to access this bolt right here, just take this bolt and get that one started in there. The other ones you should be able to get from up top. Now I'll get this lined up before we push it down. We're gonna hook this hose up over here, slide that on, and slide the clamp over. All right, now slide this in position. Just pry the dipstick out slightly. If you wanted to pull the dipstick out from underneath, you could as well. It's just a little quicker to do it this way. There we go. Now take all the bolts and just get them all started. And there's these little spacers on there. Make sure those are on there. If you lose like one or two, it's probably not a big deal. Then you want to torque these to 9 Newton meters. I'm just going from the center outward. You can take the fuel line, oops, and it's a good idea to replace these O-rings. If they don't look too bad, you can possibly reuse them, but it's recommended that you replace them. But just take a little bit of oil or even a little transmission fluid and just lubricate the O-ring. That way it doesn't rip when it's going back in. That looks good. Line this up and gently push it down. Now get these screws lined up. Be careful not to drop them. Get that one started, and then this one before I snug them down. And just snug it down. That's good. Connect this hose right here. Just lock it in place. This electrical connector right here. Make sure it clicks in. And underneath the dipstick, just push that retainer back up. Might have to push on the dipstick in a little bit. Get that to line up, just like that. That's good. Now you want to tighten up the bolts from underneath, get them started, and then snug them up. Slide this back in position. Put the bolts back in, or the screws. Now reposition the wiring harness. And it's going to go right there and right there. And where the fuel injectors go, we can plug those in. Plug that cam sensor in. It's going to go like that. Put this bracket in, just get underneath the wiring harness. Oh, I actually have to go underneath the fuel line over here first. And slide it over. Take the bolts, get those both lined up. And snug those down. Now reinsert the wiring harness into the bracket. Now take the throttle body. You can clean the back of the throttle body. Use a rag and some brake parts cleaner. And now just line this up. You can push the purge valve over here, plug that in. Lock it down. Make sure the gasket's on there, which it is. And get the bolts started. And you can torque these screws to 6.5 Newton meters. Make sure you plug in the connector. Lock it down. And take the intake hose. You want to line it up. Get these hoses plugged in, or at least in a close location. And use your pliers. Slide that on and connect these hoses. Looks good. Now slide the cover in place. Get the hose lined up. And if you have a band clamp, make sure you get that lined up. And I'll tighten that down after. And just push down and just tighten it up. And slide this in position. Put the screws in. Should be one on each side. This vehicle only has one. And tighten it down. Reconnect the battery. Use a 10mm socket, just snug it down. And just make sure it's tight. That seems good. Put the cover on. Lock it down.